Hello, this is Alan Wheeler on my YouTube channel where I discuss tarot and spirituality. And today the topic is going to be my pagan-Christian marriage, and I'm going to I've already done so. I've taken 3 cards from the Deviant Moon Tarot and 1 card from the Mystical Shaman Oracle. And I'm here at my altar with some incense going, a candle burning, and some meditative music playing here in the background. So I ran across a few YouTube videos of others who have marriages where their spouse does not follow their um, spiritual path, whether they be atheists or um, some other path. And this caused me to think about the mixing of pagan practice and Christianity, and I kind of thought back through the history of these different beliefs. And so, according to what I've learned in ancient times, um, the gods tended to be tutelary, or they were tribal or national gods. And so, if your tribe or nation was winning the battle on earth, that was because your God was winning the battle in the heavens. And we see that played out in some of the Bible stories where Yahweh is battling Baal with Elijah present at one point, and the familiar story of Moses and the plagues when Moses is battling the Egyptian priests and their gods. And of course, we have the Exodus and the crossing of the Red Sea. And so, in a little bit later history, um, up until up until the time of Constantine, we know that the Roman pagans persecuted the Christians, and of course, after Constantine, things turned around, and then Christians were persecuting the pagans, and I suppose that kind of animosity um, has continued until today. And I see exclusion on both sides many times, and so much so that um, not just me, but I've heard others say that perhaps Christo-pagans are the most misunderstood and most despised of not really acceptable to either group sometimes. And so for some, syncretism, or the mixing of religions, is a dirty word. So whether you're a purist um, in a pagan camp that's recreating a tradition or something, or a purist in a mainstream religion, um, sometimes those borders and boundaries can arise. Now, as far as my marriage, um, for many years I lived in a Christian marriage, and then 4 or 5 years ago I began expanding um, my spirituality a bit. And so I began, um, maybe one of the hardest things I have ever done, I say it was to request purchasing tarot cards, um, to talk to my wife about that. And but I expanded into meditation and yoga, and kind of the turning point for me was realizing that becoming inclusive, um, whether kind of a philosophical Buddhist or perennialism or some other kind of inclusive philosophy, that allows one to mix faiths. You know, once you grant that freedom to yourself and others, then um, at least there's not that internal conflict. And so that was a breakthrough for me, but making an altar at home and at work, going to the Unity Spiritual Center in town for sound healing circles um, was another big step. And most recently, ordering this statue of the Morrigan. And at each of these steps, communication uh, was key, and it was only when, um, for fear or nervousness, I didn't talk about what I was doing or why that things were more difficult. But as I explained my thinking, it made things much easier. And in fact, I had the advice from a priestess online to make a marriage altar. I'll turn the computer here. And there's a little altar there that I built with her advice um, for my marriage, and just to, um, I suppose, put the practice in perspective and to show my wife that she's not displaced or lose, there, nothing is lost or changed. So with that background, let's look at the cards I drew to reflect on. And the spread, before I drew the cards, um, I determined that the first one would represent um, pagan Christian practice, um, mixing pagan practices into a Christian person or marriage. And the second card was Christian pagan, the other, working the other way, working Christian ideas or practices into an otherwise pagan person or marriage. And the last card was for my um, marriage in particular. Then for the middle one, I drew the card from the mystical shaman oracle deck. So let's look at these. For the uh, first card in the spread, the Christian pagan situation. No, I'm sorry, the pagan Christian situation, bringing pagan or non-Christian practices into a Christian setting. I drew the King of Swords from the Deviant Moon Tarot. And I didn't read it as much different than the King of Swords in other decks, but it spoke to me that really a strongly reasoned defense is sometimes needed in that setting. Why do you use tarot cards? How can you use tarot cards, for example? And so that's been very important in communicating things, kind of having the theology acceptable. And that was kind of the big breakthrough for me too, that I already said, that I could explain through that inclusivity, explain that blending. of practices. Also, um, I've been making posts on Facebook to express these ideas and about inclusion and alternate, accepting other faiths and diverse people. And being able to communicate that and articulate that is very important. And as I said, it's only when I didn't communicate that the tension and problems arose in my marriage. The other thing um, this card speaks to me about the situation of bringing pagan practices into a Christian setting or Christian pagan situations is that paganism actually kind of updates and upgrades the Christian experience. And I say that because uh, many times we just need to get past the fundamentalism um, and the bad religion that we see in the mainstream religion sometimes. And so these these alternative paths really provide good counterpoint and good balance to some of those um, uh, more fundamentalist or conservative ideas. And so communicating that and using that keen mind is very important in that setting. For the second situation, the Christo-pagan or Christian pagan, where it's working the other way, where the Christian ideas or practices are coming into an otherwise pagan setting, I drew the Knight of Wands, and in the Deviant Moon Tarot, he is racing around on a flea here, and that the guidebook explains that that flea can jump erratically, make wild jumps, sometimes overshooting the mark and sometimes not coming close enough and having to make multiple jumps. And so there's that fiery, wild energy of this um, Knight of Wands. And this spoke to me of borrowing practices. Um, so maybe borrowing things from the mainstream religions, such as the uh, devotional practices, working with deity, the um, prayer beads and candles and things, and bringing these in because they serve the purpose, and um, it's more functional. It's more what works in going this other way. Now, for clarification, I drew the sorcerer from the mystical shaman oracle deck. And now I'm just working from the description in that deck, but in that deck, this character is a very dark one who uses kind of a black magic character that curses or uses the powers of magic to advance self or harm others. And again, this is just the deck description of this character. And so to me, that spoke of um, the ability of kind of Christian ideals or Christian um, ethics to kind of temper that a little bit and to bring in ideas like bless and don't curse, and to um, kind of reel in the um, darker side of those practices. And um, someone said that prayer is magic without tools, or magic is prayer with tools. And so there can be some incorporating of the two displayed in those cards. The last card I drew was for the question of my own mixing in my own marriage, of my spiritual path and my wife's, and I drew the Queen of Swords. And the Deviant Moon tarot is interesting as she holds two swords, similar to the Two of Swords, clashing there, and even drawing. I think you can see it's drawing a little bit of blood here as those swords sharpen each other. And so, similar to other decks, the Queen of Swords is keen and strategic and sees the big picture, and yet has some of the receptive, open qualities at the same time of the feminine elements. So this kind of, in a practical sense, this spoke of the need to kind of speak, to communicate, and step back and let things process. To not advancing with the aggression of the Knight of Swords, or the idealism of the Page of Swords, or the authority, the kind of strong aggression too of the King of Swords, but to speak and listen, to speak and step back. And this communication is very important in this environment. And having drawn the King and the Queen of Swords, to me is significant as well. And that good communication, that clear thinking, and walking through the unique blending of paths, walking through that together. So I will stop there with that food for thought. Thank you for watching, and as always, I hope you feel connection with people in your life, with online community, and on your spiritual path, whatever that might be. Take care.